What's the scenario? Let's plop our miracles down on the table. Do we, as most scientists would contend, live in a world of stuff, a universe of molecular Legos that give rise to everything? Did we, over the course of billions of years, manage to somehow siphon the fire of consciousness from the fabric of an uncaring universe, despite probabilities that would make a razor-thin pin tip look like the broadside of a barn? Are we just the product of bottom-up scratching, clawing, and toiling and mutating that goes along with the survival of the fittest paradigm? Do we somehow manufacture our awareness through neuron density, summoning the genie of our qualia from the quantum lamp of our brain? Perhaps we do. Many very smart people think so. Or is it the other way around, as mystics would contend, a universe where consciousness comes first and all else flowed forth from it, like a fractal, holistic, interconnected network of sentience, perhaps akin to the Tao, the Brahman, the one thing, as Hermetic philosophy calls it? Or perhaps it's not a zero-sum game. Perhaps there's some intermingling embracement of the two.
We've seen that humans have a consistent pattern of getting things wrong. We know what we want, we get it wrong, and we're consistent. We're 100% consistent at getting things wrong, which is, again, one reason why I then turned my attention to consciousness, not as something trapped inside space and time, but just the reverse. Mm-hmm. Consciousness is the author of space-time. Consciousness is first. It's not a latecomer after billions of years. It's first. And space-time is not first. Space-time is, in fact, last. It's a data structure that I'm creating right now. I'm creating it as I look around. You're creating your space-time, and your space-time is different from mine. Now, we may agree because we're members of the same species, but that doesn't mean that space-time is objective or true. It just means that you and I share the same kind of data structure. And so what evolution gave us was a user interface that is specifically shaped to hide reality. Just like your desktop interface was specifically designed to hide the circuits and software so you don't have to deal with it. And just like an interface is designed to let you control the circuits and the software without even knowing what they are, that's what evolution has done with our space and time and objects perceptions. We see those not because they're the truth, but they let us control the truth while we're completely ignorant about the nature of the truth. It's simple, dumbed down interface that lets us do what we need to do to stay alive. And so that is a shock to our deeply held intuitive beliefs. We think that space and time, or their union, as Einstein gave us, into space-time, is fundamental reality. And that objects like the moon and protons and neutrons, objects in space-time, are aspects of fundamental reality. And that absolutely contradicts evolution by natural selection. You can't have both. Either it's true that evolution by natural selection is a correct theory, and therefore space-time is not fundamental, or if space-time is fundamental, then evolution by natural selection has made a false prediction, and so we need to change the theory. Both cannot be true. Maybe both are false, but both cannot be true. And so evolution by natural selection entails that space-time is doomed. It's not fundamental. And with it go all of its contents, all the physical objects, all the particles. They're not fundamental either, which is, again, one reason why I then turned my attention to consciousness, not as something trapped inside space and time, but just the reverse. Mm-hmm. Consciousness is the author of space-time. And it does lead to interesting questions about morality that are very, very deep, and about spirituality. I mean, I mentioned that there are infinite conscious agents that come out of this. and not just one, but an infinite variety of infinite conscious agents, and probably an infinite variety of different levels of infinity. It turns out that there's not just one kind of infinity. There are bigger and bigger infinities. There's an infinite number of different infinities. You can keep going higher and higher infinities. And so it'll be interesting to explore, are there consciousnesses of all these higher levels of infinity? And if so, this is going to be a mathematically precise theory of what we've called in various traditions something like God, or the highest, whatever it might be. But it'll be a mathematically precise thing. We can ask precise mathematical questions. How many infinite consciousnesses are there? Is there a single greatest infinite consciousness? What's the relationship between that consciousness and finite consciousnesses? How much can finite consciousnesses understand about the infinite consciousness? I mean, these are now technical questions that we can ask, so we can have a scientific spirituality. So I'm looking forward to that. It should be fun, because I think science and spirituality have been at odds for a long time, and I suspect that they will continue to be at odds. But the method of science and the spiritual insights from the spiritual traditions could come together.
So the many religious traditions, spiritual traditions, have understood that space-time and matter cannot be fundamental. They've understood that there has to be something deeper, something that they've called spiritual or conscious or so forth, but they've not been able to be precise. And now science, on the other hand, has until now been stuck in a physicalist framework. Space-time and matter are fundamental, and this consciousness stuff, if it exists at all, it will have to be secondary. It somehow has to emerge from a fundamentally physical world. So that's, I think, where the science has gone wrong. But what science has that's very powerful is the scientific method. The idea that we want to take our ideas and make them as precise as we can, mathematically precise if we can, and then specify what experiments could possibly test our ideas and what outcomes would be problems for our ideas. In other words, what could you do to show that I'm probably wrong? Newton was great, but it's missing something. We need special relativity. We need quantum theory. And now we know that even our best theories of quantum field theory and general relativity, there's something missing there. There's something that needs to be corrected. We know that we're not quite right, and maybe we're deeply wrong. And so there's this humility in science as a social institution. And that's what I hope. That is what science has to offer in our spiritual quests. What the spiritual traditions have gotten right, I think, is letting go of physicalism and saying something deeper, like consciousness, is fundamental. What they've gotten wrong is that as social institutions, religious and spiritual traditions are typically still dogmatic. There's some set of documents, some scriptures or whatever it might be, that are taken as authoritative. And they guide for thousands of years what you're supposed to take to be the truth. And that's just the opposite of saying, look, these are the best ideas that we've got so far. Let's try to figure out where we're wrong. And that's what I want to see in spiritual traditions. Mm-hmm. Spiritual traditions have the deep questions, the right questions. Who are we? Why are we here? What is the meaning of life? Why is there pain and suffering? What happens after we die? These are the deep questions that we all want to understand as human beings. They're too important to be dogmatic about them. It's just too important. We need to be humble. The answers that we have in any spiritual tradition are just the best answers we've got so far. Let's have the attitude up front that, of course, I'm probably wrong. If we have that attitude up front, of course I'm probably wrong. I'm a seeker. I don't know the truth. I'm just seeking. Then we have the chance to make real progress. If you believe you have the truth, that stops inquiry. Believing that you know the truth is the worst thing that you can do if you're really trying to find out the truth. You need to be an open-minded inquirer. So that's what I hope we see going forward, is that the institutional humility of science, as I said, individual scientists are dogmatic. We're just people. But to have that, the institutional humility of science become part of the institutional humility of spiritual traditions would open up a flowering of our understanding of the spiritual side of the human condition.
Mm-hmm. And I enjoyably, ironically say, "Amen" to everything you just said. And, 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 and,